Well, good evening and welcome to this Business of Tech Lounge episode as I'm reporting from the CompTIA ChannelCon event here in Chicago. I'm live and wanted to spend a little bit of time going through the event and talking about some of my reactions. I've got clips for you. I've got information about what's been going on in the event. So this evening, here's what we're going to run through. I want to give you a little bit of the overview of what CompTIA's direction was based on the keynote presentations, both from their member meeting as well as the kickoff of the event this morning with a full-on industry keynote. From there, we'll dive into some of my impressions as well as we cover it, and then I'm going to take you into the second part where we'll talk a little bit about what Scott Galloway, who was the main stage keynoter, was and what he was talking about during his presentations. I'm going to dive into some of my impressions of the event overall and give you some of the impressions from the various committee meetings that I had the opportunity to attend. I'm going to dive into one of the metaverse sessions that I did attend and got some highlights for you to get some understanding of that portion of it. We will then also, I attended a managed services section and an industry panel around that. I've got some latest data to discuss, and we'll wrap up with the opportunity to ask questions and answers. Of course, if you have questions while I'm going through, please don't hesitate to bring them up over the course of the broadcast. And we are keeping an eye on the chat. My handy producers here keeping an eye on everything and help keep us on track. So with that, let's dive in. I want to start off by talking about what happened with Todd Thibodeaux, who is CEO of CompTIA, and what he revealed through a pair of keynotes. Now, structurally, they had their annual member meeting as part of the event during lunch yesterday, that's Tuesday, where they did some of the discussion and opened up some of the strategic direction. And then he represented that again in a keynote address about where the organization is going. Now, to give you a sense, I thought it was actually really interesting as they dove in and talked about their progress as an organization. I wasn't aware of the size that they'd reached at this point. So I've got a little bit of data and a clip to show you of exactly where they're at as an organization.
The next item is, and I bet a bunch of you in the room would be surprised to hear this, but we're $130 million in revenue. That makes us one of the 10 largest trade associations in the world. And with the growth path that we're on now, we're on a growth path to be one of the 5 largest trade associations by revenue in the world. And you have some groups like the Chemical Council that are $750 million in revenue at the top of the pie. But as you go down that list, there's some big professional societies. But among trade groups, people that are 501c6s like we are absolutely one of the largest in the world. So we're hoping that that number continues to grow. And we have, as a board goal for ourselves and our organization, to reach 250 million, which would put us in the top 2 or 3 organizations, trade groups in the world, and certainly in the U.S.
So that gave me a real sense of where the organization is. I've been involved with CompTIA numerous different ways previously in my career, and they've grown that portion of it tremendously. Now, the thing that's interesting to think about CompTIA is the bulk of that revenue actually comes from their certifications in education business. If you're not familiar, particularly that A+ certification that they're so known for, they've got a large number of different kinds of products around education. So that's where the bulk of that revenue is coming from. Now, next up, I want to actually dive into a little bit of where they're going. So I've got some clips to play for you of Todd's keynote from this morning to give you a little bit of that background.
So put these things all in perspective. Again, the U.S. workforce at about 160 million, the career intent being about 25% of that, and then the tech intent only being about 5%. So right now, when we're looking for people, you hear people saying, I can't find anybody. It's because they're only looking in that pool. No wonder they can't find people when we have this massive turnover, we have this massive number of jobs that are open, but yet we're only fishing in this little part of the pond. The reason that we've had such a challenge as an industry to get people to really consider the tech industry is because of something we call the confidence gap. And this sits between someone thinking about a career and then the industries that they look at. And as I said yesterday during the annual member meeting, the tech industry has the largest confidence gap of any other industry. We have the biggest barriers of entry for any industry. There's clear pathways and clear knowledge pathways for other industries, but all the STEM initiatives, all the coding initiatives, all these things you've heard me say a bunch of times before have all created this confidence gap, and it's just getting worse. This number is bigger with women, it's bigger with minorities, and it's bigger in rural areas. We've measured this consistently, this challenge that people have. They don't have people that they know that work in the industry as much anymore, and then to fill these jobs. We have to tell much better stories, more consistently, about how great it is to work in the industry, what kinds of skill sets apply, how you train for these, and that it's accessible. You don't have to be a math and science genius to work in this industry, but that's the perception. That's a big one that still has to be overcome. So if we want to be this big tent where companies invest in people from all backgrounds, if we want to bring in these people, we have to start doing that. We have to start putting that message out there, putting that message forward, instead of over-speccing jobs. We see entry-level jobs across the board in the industry where people are asking for 5 years experience and advanced certifications and degrees for positions which are entirely entry-level. That's not investing in people. That's not making sure that you're making jobs accessible to all backgrounds. But it also means making a commitment to building your workforce, not just acquiring your workforce. There's a big difference between those two phrases. When you're building it, you're doing different things, and acquiring is hiring people. Building is finding a way to create a great pipeline. It means accepting people into roles that are only 50–60% of the way there, but are loaded with potential, as opposed to saying, well, I'm only gonna fill that position if I can find the exact right person. And again, that exact right person is already working for somebody else. So all you're doing is cherry picking away from somebody else. You're not doing anything to really increase and build your pipeline. It also means creating long-term commitments to career paths for people that you can invest in over time. That's something that has been kind of lost, and we saw that happen after the financial crisis. The amount of investment that companies were making in terms of training for their own employees really dropped off, because it just became easier to just hire people as opposed to developing people. So we've identified about 30 job roles that we think cover about 90% of the jobs in tech. And we're going to build explorations for each of these job roles eventually. So each one will have those, be able to have those things that I mentioned, but then we'll also have a training program for them where they'll learn 20 or 25 of the competencies that are needed in that job. But what we're trying to do is create a barrier where people can go and take those programs, and then when they're done, they're like, that wasn't as hard as I thought. I actually kind of like that. I might have some aptitude for this.
So Todd's really laying out a vision for a direction of education that goes wider, and particularly deeper. One of the things that he talked about was the fact that they have lots of entry-level certifications and ways of getting on for to go a first test. Found is that they don't actually have as much to be able to help people with continuing education. And as such, they're really thinking about the way that they can go much deeper and make sure to have a way to onboard any potential person who's interested in a tech career and have some certification that is relevant to them, that shows that they have that level of talent and skill to be able to do something. And it was really interesting to me to hear his focus on the way we as an industry really need to focus on a much better job of expanding our reach and our pool of applicants. If you hear in some of that clip, he was really focused on the fact that oftentimes in the way we look at the marketplace, we're only hiring people that are perfect. We overspec a job, and we don't have opportunities for someone to come on who is not necessarily fully ready. That's something that we've talked about a lot on the Business of Tech. If you've listened to the show, is you know that we talk about all the time the difficulty of hiring. And Todd's statement here is that we need to be being a much broader about our embrace and growing tech people, and then give them career paths to become better at what they're doing. He was really focused on the idea of collaboration with employers to make sure that they are doing a better job of onboarding and using CompTIA certifications to drive that. I was really interested in all of this. And I actually have to say, like, as laying out a vision, this makes an awful lot of sense to me, because we do constantly talk about a need for people. And if you view CompTIA as the education engine that's powering your employees, it actually makes an awful lot of sense. And I talk about financial incentives all the time. This very much aligns CompTIA's revenue model with the output and goals that they're doing. In fact, they're so committed to this. I was really interested to hear in this next clip, they're thinking about making these certifications even more valuable.
And we'll have that on board, but that will give us the kinds of power to become actually a degree granting organization. We could actually grant AA degrees as a result of having this Title IV eligibility, and also be able to directly accept VA and GI Bill dollars for organization.
So think about that. If CompTIA can actually issue AA degrees through their programs as an organization, and particularly based on their virtual delivery of everything, you've got a really great, interesting pipeline of candidates coming through. Now, the thing that I was really taking away with this is it redefines in my mind the way that I think of them as an organization. Oftentimes they're thought of as like this community and connection place. But if you think of them just from their revenue driver is this certification engine, it becomes really interesting. And that's the bit that I was really struck by, is that the message was very clearly, this is what's important to us. Let's dive in a little bit more on this next clip.
The other thing that's going to be really key for us going forward in the future is to kind of expand beyond the entry level. So we're kind of the unrivaled leader in the entry level space. There's some entities that are trying to come in and play in our space, but we have the broadest range of entry level credentials. And based on the number of people that are coming into our programs, we still have an amazingly strong position. What we want to do is take advantage of that and spread out into other programs. So to have expert level cybersecurity credentials, have expert level credentials for networking or for cloud or for data or for some of the other areas that we're going to focus on through these 30 job roles, so that we have a full spectrum.
So you can see it coming together, right? If they have a whole catalog of pieces to come together, this makes a lot of sense. So I really was struck again by this idea of redefining them. If I'm answering my own question, why do we care? We care because if we're viewing CompTIA as an engine of people and certifications, and we get involved to help groom them and put them through the right courses as business owners, you're well positioned to do something with it. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, he had one other detail of the way that he was going to market that I thought was worthy of highlighting.
So I'd love it if 5 years from now, we were the preeminent place to train for Amazon certifications and take advantage of what the competitors in our space are doing. Instead of just reacting to it with our own products, well, let's meet them on their own turf. And they'll love what we do because they want more people trained in their programs too. And if we can be an entree for that, I suspect they would welcome that.
So think about that. If their 5-year version of this would be beyond their own programs and actually offering, they referenced Amazon, they also mentioned Microsoft and Cisco as examples during this. Imagine if it was sort of the one-stop shop for doing all of these certifications for technical staff of all different kinds. And by the way, if they can go all the way through with the plan, you end up being able to get an AA level degree behind that. That's a really interesting vision. Now, the proof is going to be very much in the pudding. They have to actually execute on this plan and expand beyond their current capabilities. So that's something we'll be watching for to see if that actually pulls off. But at least we've laid out the vision of where they see this going. And I'm intrigued. I will say, like, if we're definitely filling this need, let's redefine the way that we consider CompTIA. Now, hold that thought, because we will revisit it a little bit later. Because what I want to actually transition into next is talking a little bit about Scott Galloway, who was the keynote address for this. Now, if you're not familiar with Scott Galloway's work, I'll give you my bias. I'm actually a big fan of his and have tracked his stuff for a very number of years, back to some of his winners and losers videos. But to give you a taste of it, what he does a lot right now is, besides he's a professor at NYU Stern, he's also hosts 2 podcasts. He hosts his own, The Prof G Show, as well as Pivot with Kara Swisher. And I want to give you a little taste of that, of what he's doing on Pivot. And this is a conversation going on in terms of what Microsoft did recently and in terms of their partnership with Netflix.
Is it in terms of partnerships? and your reputation in the community. I remember I did a brand strategy project for a company called AMB that ultimately ended up becoming Prologis, and it's run by one of the biggest brains in the real estate world, a guy named Hamid Moghadam. And his brand, when I was interviewing him about what their strategy was, our strategy is to be known in the marketplace as being a fantastic partner. And at the real estate business, there's so many cowboys and so much full body contact negotiation that we want to be seen as a great partner that wants to make money, but also wants our partners to make money. And I thought that's such a unique visionary positioning. And this is what's happening in the tech community. And that is, of all partners, the Darth Vader of the 90s is now perceived as a better partner. People don't, oh my gosh, Amazon has been the greatest partner, said almost no one ever. Oh my God, I love working with Facebook. They told me they've been honest, they've been transparent, said no one ever. And Google, who puts, Google, which is kind of nicer, but still at the end of the day,
they
overnight, they can
the driver's seat.
They can do an algorithm change and you're shit out of luck. But Microsoft is genuinely seen in the business community as being a thoughtful, good partner, emphasis on the word partner. And that's why I think they went with them.
So you get a little taste of his thinking and his approach to this, particularly relevant to our community. Now, again, I'll point you and say their podcast is great. I'm a fan of both of those. I would encourage you to listen to them if you want a little bit more of that. Now, when I set this all up, I was thinking that I would actually do the same sort of idea, and I would be pulling clips, short little clips as a news segment. But my hosts did not nixed all of that in real time as I was doing recording on site. While issuing me press credentials, didn't actually go ahead and go through with letting me use all that stuff. So I don't have the ability to give you complete sort of coverage in the same kind of way and break down some of the certain highlights. Now, the good news is if you want to go ahead and search, you can actually do on YouTube. He did a version of his 2021 predictions deck, which is his overhyped and underhyped conversation. So you can actually find on YouTube, you can find relevant videos of him doing that presentation, and he did a version of that. As I said, I'm a bit of a fan, so I had already done some research on that. Now, I want to actually give you, I did take some notes because there were two big references that I thought were very relevant to our IT services community that I want to share with you. And this one was one that I heard and I wrote down really fast to make sure I got it right. So he was talking about education, and he also was then diving in, and here I am going to go right into the quote. So I think this industry is rife for disruption, and I know that's what we're here to talk about. You're going to see, just as newspapers were unbundled, kind of one section at a time, the sports and classifieds and news sections, you're going to see education become unbundled. I think we're coming to the conclusion that certification is important, but it should be more skills-based and less brand-driven. And companies ranging from Apollo Private Equity to Apple are reserving or allocating an increasing number of positions to people with non-traditional certifications. The best thing you can do if you run a company, mind you, to help the Commonwealth in the short run, is stop this fetishization of elite universities and start creating more on-ramps to great careers and great jobs to people who demonstrate grit and talent, even if they don't have the traditional four-year degree. That was striking, right? Because that actually completely aligns with the strategy that CompTIA is laying out of recognizing certifications as a recognition of skill. So Scott's kind of nodding exactly to that. And he specifically called this out as something that was underhyped. So circle that as an opportunity. And he also provided this piece of insight that I thought was super relevant for those of us in IT services. He said, I think UI UX initiatives, interactions with digital offerings, is becoming the new core competence. The creative director or the person in charge of product design for UI UX used to be the person who got to have funny stuffed animals on his or her desk or had a cool poster, and they're creative. Now they're in the C-suite. It's no accident to see as an Airbnb and Snap went to the CEOs went to Rhode Island School of Design, Hampton's Delaware School, but I think this is the new tech, that this is the new core competence. He then went on to say, I love Airbnb. I just love to browse Airbnb, and I found it interesting. And here's the quote on this. He diving in saying, by the way, this is Hilton's on the right, and this was Airbnb's on the left, and he compared to that. Now, think about all the things that we've been talking about on the show from a trends perspective, and talking about the investment in UI, UX, and the experience part of it. And again, Scott's recognizing that the big trend, and he also showed this out as underhyped, was the ability to leverage that role and make it a leadership position. That it is a lot less about the tech and much more about the way you interact with that. Very much aligns with some of the things that we've been seeing in terms of buying habits. It also very much aligns with some of the discussions that I've had around e-commerce in the IT services space, as well as making service delivery more relevant. So that was some of the big highlights that I thought were relevant for IT services providers. And it was really interesting to see that alignment of the two pieces. So let's take a quick break and a thank you to our folks at PC Matic, and get a little message from them before we carry on.
Think you know PC Matic? Think again. PC Matic is working with MSPs to deliver true zero trust, default deny endpoint security, allowing only trusted applications and blocking all the rest. A lightweight, simple to deploy, and easy to manage approach to application allow listing. Layering a default deny approach provides MSPs of all sizes the ability to focus again on prevention, and PC Matic delivers this without impacting performance or efficiency. Find out more by visiting PCMatic.com/MSP and ask about their exclusive lead sharing program backed by a primetime national TV campaign.
Thank you, PC Matic, for sponsoring this, making this available, and I certainly want to recognize that. I know I've got a couple of listeners. I want to thank you guys for the quick comments that I took a look. I will be taking question and answer, but a quick recognition to both Tim and Matt for watching. Really do appreciate that. We'll do some questions if you have them a little bit later in the show. Now, I want to dive in to a little bit of my event review. Now, I want to give some context to this, because one of the things that I was really struck with during the event was a bit of a disconnect between Todd's messaging and then the rest of ChannelCon. I was very struck by the fact that if CompTIA's core mission is all of this certification and education, it would make sense to me that what we're here to talk about would be implementing that in your organization, leveraging those programs, driving certification growth. And it wasn't any of that. It actually really wasn't any of that. And I was really struck with asking myself the question of, well, besides why do we care, why are we here? What's the point? And I actually really did struggle to dive into some of that, because I'll tell you, my original plan for covering this was to attend a number of the breakout committee meetings and find out what the various initiatives were that were driven around education and commitment. And instead, the committee meetings were actually converted into a game show. And I mean that very truthfully and exactly what I said. They ran a game show over the course of multiple meetings where you would come in and teams would play against one another. And I guess they're trying to show off some of the resources, but it was a very awkward use of time in my mind, and not exactly what I was expecting from that use. And I was struck by the element of like, well, what is the point of this? What is driving it? And how does it fit to that larger message? And if I'm trying to think about my hiring practices or use this from a certification perspective, I wasn't really seeing the connection. So my original ideas were a little different than where I ended up going to it. Now, I did want to dive into two sessions that I talked to. Let's dive into the first one. There was a session broke out on the metaverse. And you may remember I've done a conversation with Seth Robinson recently where we talked about, whether something was hype or real. And one of the topics we talked about was the metaverse. And so I was interested to see how that conversation went. So let's start with a clip from that where they're working to define the metaverse.
Okay, so all of those are virtual worlds in which people immerse and they're able to create community, they're able to socialize, they're able to sometimes now work, learn, work on projects. All of those things are done in a virtual space. Now what we're seeing, and we'll show you in a bit, is that many big brands and many organizations are spending a lot of money to not only have physical experiences, but now take it into what they're calling this virtual space called the metaverse. And we're seeing brands create really, even restaurants are going to the metaverse, retail brands, fashion.
Yeah, that was, for me, my reaction was, that's a lot of word salad, and it didn't make a lot of sense. If you're interested in the metaverse, recently Matthew Ball put out his new book, on the metaverse very specifically. And his definition was that it is a 3D representation and a 3D interactive internet, which actually made a little bit more sense as a concise and defined definition for me. In fact, one of the big examples that he talks about is the idea of an airport, and this is actually happening at one of the big international airports right now, and where you can actually, they're doing a full real-time simulation of everything that's going on in the airport. And what they mean is they're tracking the space, all of the people, all of the luggage, all of the planes, all of the dynamics of that. And the importance of it is that you can actually then do impact analysis. So if a gate needs to be closed, the old way would be to go, we'll move from gate 83 to gate 84 because it's right next to it. Now you could actually run simulations of this 3D rendering and know exactly what will happen and check for where are all the people, where are all the luggage, where are the planes, and actually be much more dynamic about it. So that version of a definition seems much more actionable than what we were hearing on stage. So I will admit I was kind of scratching my head a little bit on this definition. I want to give you another version of this, because in talking, there's very much a theme of decentralization was the key theme of Web 3.0. This from the speaker, and so let's get a version of that.
Don't think we should or can decentralize everything. I think that is like you do meet people in the crypto industry who have this almost like anarchist view of how the world should be. Decentralization just sucks for many reasons. It's just the user experience tends to be terrible. Anything that's decentralized is very slow to evolve. There's a lot to be said for having powerful decision makers who can move fast and break things. But there are extremes, right? And I think like in some of the world has gone too far to the extreme of centralization. The US dollar is actually a good example. While we view it as advantageous as we can do things like sanction Russia, and increasingly America executes foreign policy through the banking and financial system. We weaponize the fact that the world likes and uses dollars, and those dollars move through banks that the US government regulates.
Okay, so live event, everybody. We actually clicked the wrong one. So let me go. We're going to go ahead and replay the one that I meant to, and I'll tie the two together here in a second.
Sure. By the way, NFTs real quick, we talked about it, decentralization. We talked about that there can be different assets. It could be a video, an image. It could be all kinds of different things. Fashion people are using it. Quick example, Nike as the brand. I just met with them at a different conference like a couple of weeks ago, and they've created this digital version of their sneakers. And they can be collected, and it's like a rare form of design of a sneaker. You have the virtual form of it, and then you can own it as if you owned a rare baseball card, if you owned a rare kind of whatever you collect.
So the reason I wanted, that was the conversation around the decentralization that happened on premise. Now, the clip that we played right before that was Professor Omid Malikan on my show when we talked about crypto. And I wanted to compare and contrast the presentation of decentralization as this amazing version versus Professor Malikan's version, which is there are times for things to be decentralized and there are times where there aren't. And I thought that was a much more nuanced, useful conversation. I'm going to reference people to watch that interview with Dr. Malikan, because for me, that was really the big difference in the presentation. Is it felt a little too hypey to me in terms of like, we're just going to say kind of nice things about that. But instead, I'd rather offer a little bit more of a practical example. Now, they did offer a practical example. So let's go ahead and give you a little insight into the one example that was cited.
And I'll share with you as well, I think the last one, Accenture, I think was the last one. They say our latest technology vision invites you to meet me in the metaverse. So if you apply to Accenture, you're going to be onboarded in your experience into the metaverse. So the first time that you interact with anybody, whether you're going to a physical office or not, you're going to meet a group of people as an avatar. You're going to go into this environment. In fact, I was on a panel the other day with the Accenture folks, and they were talking about this. And it's actually been a way for people to meet in new ways, to engage, to meet people from across the world, and it's been working for them. It's actually proved to be a good concept.
So yes, I read the same story. Accenture has announced that they are working on that. And their definition of that is a lot looser. And I'm not sure I would position it as a real world example of the metaverse. Now, of course, everyone's got this is all about different opinions. And I really appreciated that CompTIA put this on for us. But at the same time, I was not as convinced to that. So actually, there's a couple of people chatting about it. Let's throw a couple of those up for some of the discussion while we talk about that. Tim was mentioning here that again, how does the metaverse tie into CompTIA? Well, I think this was more a session around the way that we want to get direction, right? So the idea was to present some of these technologies as the way that we're going. And so for me, it was a bit. I was viewing it that way, and I just was actually admit I was disappointed in the presentation in the session, because it very much felt like hype versus the practical nature of that. Yep, Tim, I would say like the meta classrooms learning, like these are all ideas. And the presenter, to her credit, actually said that there was an element of throwing things up at the wall and seeing what would stick, and that there was lots of experimentation going on. My recommendation remains, let's be more skeptical on this, particularly when we are generally playing in a smaller world with smaller companies and smaller budgets. We have to be very deliberate about the money that we're spending and making sure that we're doing that completely right. So yeah, I right there with you, Tim. It seemed not relevant. I thought the same thing and felt a little bit the same way. So let's go ahead, and I want to actually move into something that's a little bit more discussion friendly for us here. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what happened in the managed services session. Now this managed services session actually happened this afternoon, right about 1 o'clock. So I didn't even have time to get the second portion of it fully put together for you, but I want to actually give you some of the insights from Carol and April in their managed services research and what was most sort of relevant to me. So I'm going to cite a couple of pieces that she talked about. The first was she was talking a little bit about sentiment in the market. So quote, "But I must tell you, they have the pessimistic and very pessimistic categories here are a big rise from what we were seeing a year ago. I'm guessing, and I think it's an estimated and an educated guess, that if we ask the same question today, those pessimistic numbers might be a bit higher right now because of all the things that are going on in the world. There are really more macroeconomic things that are happening that make people nervous. But for the most part, people are feeling pretty good about managed services." It's really interesting to see that their CompTIA data was both in alignment with what we've been talking about in terms of trends on the show from a macroeconomic perspective, as well as my take on that. So it was interesting to see that CompTIA's data also aligned with that. She also gave some really interesting insights into the changes. So quote, "If you were running an MSP business 10 years ago, I would venture a very strong guess that the type of customer you deal with today is probably different than the type of customer you were dealing with 10 years ago. The way that they purchase and their level of technical knowledge is probably different. That is a good bet, I think. You either have not made adjustments or you've made adjustments. If you made them, good for you. If you haven't, that's why it's keeping you up at night. You see customers that now want to procure on their own directly. They can go to an online marketplace and buy whatever technologies they need." Yep, that was my take too. Is that interesting again to see that the research is showing that the buyer has very much changed. By the way, for those that are watching my kind of stuff, I'm going to redirect you to some of my pieces around e-commerce, because this is exactly why that I'm having the conversation that I talk about. Links are right there available at businessup.tech. But one of the things that we talk about all the time is this change in marketing and the change in the way that people engage. This is why I'm focused on it in such that way. I'm going to give you a couple more pieces of insight. Again, this one really interesting how it lined up with what happened earlier. We were thinking about customer experience. So again, from Carolyn, "How well you are providing that customer experience could determine whether a prospective customer decides to go with you or with the company down the street that does a better job. I have all kinds of data on what I mean by CX, but let's boil it down to a couple of things. Ease of doing business. Are you easy to do business with? That sounds like a perennial yes we are or no we aren't, but really important to your customers. One of the most important things about being easy to do business with is being a good communicator and having many options for communications. We found in a study that I just did on partner experience. Funny again, thematically, how it fits in with exactly what Scott Galloway was talking about in his keynote, that UI UX, which is very much a component of the way customers interact with your technology. All ties very much together, and it was very interesting to see that come up as yet another trend. Her final piece that I wanted to cite for you guys from this presentation, again, one of the ways that we're seeing a big change, and for MSPs to make more money today, is to move beyond infrastructure as the main play that you have. That's what we mean by premium services. We're seeing that the MSPs today that are really making headway and their profit margins are up, the deals they're doing are larger, are those that are going beyond simply managing and monitoring customers' network and the devices that are on the network. So moving away from hardware only, infrastructure only, and moving up the step to applications. It's funny how that's exactly what I talk about in terms of the move to, move to the work layer. And Tim, you're exactly right. Break fix versus fully managed 10 years ago. We're moving even further up the stack into that work layer. And again, this is what really is resonating with me, is this idea of moving further up the stack into the work layer. She's calling it applications. I'm going to call it the work layer. They are one and the same. So that's some of the stuff that I found most interesting over this first day and a half of the ChannelCon event. Really, I've got some time here specifically dedicated for questions and answers. If you've got questions for me on anything that I've been seeing, or as well, if you want to go larger than that, I am certainly happening them. You can go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll throw them up and I will take any of those. I also want to go ahead and acknowledge some of the people that are on here. Matt, I really appreciate you being here today and watching the broadcast. It means a lot. Really do appreciate that. Tim, I know you've also been here and do that very much. And you make a great point about buying a car online. You can have it shipped and drive. You should be able to buy some of the cyber services online. It's exactly what I've been saying in terms of my e-commerce plays as well. That's one of the things that really is important to me. So, Tim, you asked, how are the booths? So I will admit I took a wander around there, and my eye was for new entrants into there. Now, I'm not actually going to plug anybody in particular, but one of the conversations I had from a booth perspective was there was actually someone in the payment space. This is an area that is traditionally been underrepresented in this space. There all of a sudden feel like there are a handful of players that are coming in that are helping with the idea is to help the interaction between you and your customer as a service provider and the way that you take money in. Now, if I'd gone back 2 or 3 years ago, say pre-pandemic, right, I was not seeing a ton of players thinking about this from a payment processing perspective. I am now, and that's a difference. And it very much fits into e-commerce. And I actually asked this vendor point blank, what were they seeing in terms of adoption? And they were very much not thinking about the element of what I was talking about from an e-commerce, because they recognize that MSPs are actually further behind than they should be. But this vendor was much more interested in saying, well, if we can help them with this portion and be much more ease of interaction between you and your customers in the billing perspective, we probably will be able to move further down the line, as we go from there. And I'm seeing this as well. Favorite swag? I didn't pick up a single piece of swag. I freely admit I don't bring any more branded anything back into my house. I have purged everything, and I don't do anything from a swag perspective. So I have a pen somebody insisted on giving me, and I didn't notice anything else. I did notice some beanbag cornhole games going on in somebody's booth, and I thought that was good fun as well. Well, this has been super fun. I'll hang up for a couple more minutes and thank everybody. If you're not watching the podcast, please go ahead and sign up. Please make sure that you are subscribing to the Business of Tech. It's available every single day as an audio podcast. It is available every single week as a video show on YouTube. We additionally now have our new weekly newsletter that is available. It comes out every week, where you can sign up and actually get a new piece of writing from me as well. If you want, you can also get the Daily Digest, which now comes out every single day, and everyone gets free access to all the stories on the website, and Patreons get it forever. So that's one of those things that I think is interesting. All right, we got another question coming in. This one is from Hunter. Thanks for coming. How is the conference attendance relative to pre-pandemic? Well, admittedly, my last sort of serious conference experience was mid-2019. So from my perspective, it feels roughly the same as kind of that level. It's been, but I would put it in comparison to previous ChannelCons. I, without having spent a bunch of time counting, sort of would have pegged this for 300 some people or so. And that's been just sort of generally my sense. So it definitely has a vibe of lots of people who are back for the first time. The conversation that I keep overhearing, as well as having, of course, is the "I have not seen you in a very long time." So that's the sense. I also will tell you that I've heard from one or two of the vendors that I've talked to that they are still feeling like it is gearing back up. How's the food? The important question. It's fine. I almost threw a picture up that I did take of conference chicken, my old friend, which I had not seen in quite some time. So I did have the conference chicken, and it is exactly the same as it was prior. Well, this has been super fun. I got again, in case you guys have any last questions, but those are the things that I've been thinking about here at ChannelCon. I will be here through tomorrow. If anyone is checking that is on site, you are welcome to find me. I've been wearing my MSP Radio swag. I am easy to find. Additionally, if you want to reach out, if you have questions or something you want me to look further into, I can always cover it on part of the show. It's what we do, and I will be doing more live streams ongoing. With that, I think I'm going to wrap up for the evening. Really appreciate everyone joining me today. Hope this has been of value. Please go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure that you engage and share this around. If you thought this was great coverage, go ahead and share this out with the rest of the community. Really appreciate it. Thank you all. Have a great night, and I will talk to you again next time.